Well, this evening is our final Wednesday night in the series called I Am, where we are looking at the 7 different times in the Gospel of John that Jesus said, I am, and then something. And these are significant, these 7 times, and they're very profound passages. And we've been taking one a week. Now, if you can do math, and I can't do math very well, but I can at least figure this out. There are 6 Wednesdays in Lent, and there are 7 I am statements. So we're not getting to them all. What about the 7th one? Well, good news. Look forward to Easter Sunday. I'm going to do the 7th one on Easter Sunday. And the 7th one is when Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. You may have heard that before, right? And so I think it's a good one for Easter, right? So tonight is I am the gate, or I am the door for the sheep. And we read that passage a few minutes ago in as a gospel reading, and that was the ESV version. And now we're going to walk through it in the NIV version. In fact, I'm going to go back. I'm going to start a few verses before that. In John chapter 10, we're going to take a look at verses 1 through 10. And this is going to be a little bit more like a Bible study than most sermons. But so if you like a good Bible study where we really dig into it, you're going to love this. If you brought your personal Bible from home, I invite you to get it out. You might want to pull the Bible out of the pew rack, or maybe you've got a Bible app on your smartphone and you want to pull it up. I'm going to put the NIV version on the screens. You might want to follow along in a different version, like the ESV or maybe your favorite version, because it's kind of fun to see how different versions put things. You might get insight that I don't necessarily talk about. So we're at John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. And significantly, this comes right after John chapter 9, right? I know, which is not a joke, but it's significant because it's really a continuation of that story. And that story of John chapter 9, you might remember when on Sunday, that was a story that Seth preached about with the blind man who Jesus healed, and then the Pharisees gave this guy all kinds of trouble because they couldn't figure out what was happening, and remember they asked him who he thought Jesus was, and he makes this wonderful confession of Jesus being a prophet and the Messiah, and he believes in Jesus, and Jesus heals him. But there's all this conflict between the religious leaders and this blind man, and this conflict between the religious leaders and Jesus. And remember, right at the end, Jesus says, you guys are blind. He's like, they're like, what do you mean we're blind? We can see? And he said, you know what, if you could realize that you couldn't see, if you could realize that you were spiritually blind, then I would heal you. But as it is, because you refuse to see that you're spiritually blind, that makes your blindness all the worse. And then almost right away, chapter 10, here we are. He says, very truly I tell you, Pharisees, right? He's still laying into them. It's the same story, same day, same moment. He just keeps laying into them. These religious leaders, these Pharisees. He says, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. So first of all, this idea that these are Pharisees, are religious leaders, that's who he's talking to. And then he starts using this metaphor of a sheep pen and a gate. And so we have to understand, we have to get a little background about how shepherding went and sheep raising went in first century Palestine. And quite often, a number of families would get together and kind of pool their sheep. And they would build a large sheep pen, and several families would put their sheep in the pen. And this helped with economies of scale. And they would have a gate in the pen, and then someone would always be watching the gate. Someone would always be watching the sheep, and they would stand right at the gate. It might be a hired hand, but usually it was just a member of one of the families, and they would take turns. And so you could see how this would be much easier if you had 3, 4, 5, 7 families. You could rotate. One family would be hard-pressed to have someone at the gate 24/7 watching the sheep. Several families together, you'd have those economies of scale. It'd be much easier. So there was always a gate, and there was always someone watching the sheep, standing at the gate and controlling access to the sheep. But then Jesus says, hey, look, if you want to harm the sheep, if you want to steal one of the sheep, if you want to hurt them, you're going to have to climb in some other way. You're not going to get through the gate because someone's watching it. You're going to have to go in some other way. So we have to understand that this whole thing here that we're studying tonight was directed at the religious leaders, the Pharisees. We have to understand this idea of the collective sheep farming with the gatekeeper. We also have to see, we're about to see here in this, the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. So if you have all these families, and they all have their sheep in the sheep pen, and the sheep are all intermingling, how do you tell which sheep belongs to which owner? Well, by the voice, because the sheep know the voice of their owner. So the owner comes out and calls his sheep, and those sheep will come and follow him. The rest of the sheep will stay in the pen. The sheep know their voice. And this is something that was very prevalent in Jesus' time and is still prevalent in the East. There's a big difference between how sheep are farmed or raised in the East today, even in our world today, and how they're raised in the West. Here in America, you ever been to a sheep farm or ever seen sheep being herded? You know how they do it? They do it with dogs and trucks, right? And they drive them, right? And the dogs chase the sheep where they want to go. Or they'll use trucks to herd the sheep and keep them all in one group as they take them where they want them to go. That's how we do it here in America. That's how they do it in Europe. But how they do it in the Middle East today is quite different and very much the same that they did it in Jesus' day. They don't herd they don't drive the sheep. The owner calls out to the sheep and they follow him. Let me ask you, which do you think is more efficient? Driving the sheep with dogs and trucks or calling to them and having them follow? Yeah, it's actually the trucks and the dogs. That's actually more efficient. We Westerners, we're really good at efficiency, which should teach us something, because Jesus doesn't care at all about efficiency. He cares about the relationship that the shepherd has with the sheep. Efficiency is the enemy of relationship. Jesus calls to us by name, and we follow him. He does not drive us. We follow him because we love him. But they will never follow a stranger, right? In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees still did not understand what he was telling them. Okay, this is a very interesting phrase here, figure of speech. Jesus used this figure of speech. The Greek word here is paromia, means figure of speech, paromia, and it's only used in the Gospel of John, as opposed to the Greek word parabole, which means parable, which is used in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right? So get out your sticky notes and your highlighters, right? And so these are two different words. Matthew, Mark, and Luke use the word parable, and Jesus tells parables. In John, Jesus doesn't tell any parables, but he does have these figures of speech. It's different from a parable, but it's the same in that it is meant to be a metaphor used in teaching. So he's using this figure of speech, of this idea of a gate and the sheep pen. But then this says, right, the scripture says, where is it? Is it still up there? Yes. The Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them, right? He's telling this metaphor, this figure of speech they don't understand. So, in the second half of this passage, we're going to see that he doesn't try to explain it, which is different because in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he often tells a parable and then explains it, right? He's not going to explain it. He's not going to try to clear up the misunderstanding. He actually ramps it up. He ramps it up. Let's look at it. Jesus says, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep." See how he's turned it from that there's a gatekeeper and he's the one calling out, and the gatekeeper is controlling access for the sheep and Jesus. Now he's saying, I'm the gate for the sheep. So what's going on here? Remember, he's talking to the religious leaders and he's calling them out. He's saying, you guys have failed at your job. I put you in charge of the gate for my sheep, my people who I love and who I want to be close to and who I want to save. And I put you guys in charge of their faith, and I put you guys in charge of their spiritual growth. I put you in charge of the gate so that they can have access to me. But you guys have failed, and you've exploited your position for your own gain. You've become the robbers and the thieves jumping over the fence. And so he's saying, since you have failed utterly in your job, you religious leaders, I'm going to come and I'm going to do your job. I'm going to be the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me, you religious leaders, he's talking about, thieves and robbers, and the sheep have not listened to you. I am the gate, and whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief, these religious leaders who have failed at their job and exploited it, come only to steal and kill and destroy. But I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. There's two morals here. The first one is that those of us today in religious leadership positions are hereby warned and admonished. Right? Jesus is talking to us. He's saying, look, I gave you a job to do. Your job is the gatekeeper. You control the access to Jesus, to me. It's reminiscent of when he said to Peter and the other disciples, hey, look, if you don't tell them their sins are forgiven, who's going to tell them? If you don't tell them about what I've done, then they're not going to know. I've given you a job to do. You got to be responsible. Don't fail. Don't become corrupt like the religious leaders in Jesus' day. He's saying you religious leaders today have a responsibility. And so that goes, I guess, for mostly for pastors. I am paying attention. But I think it's a little broader than that. I think religious leaders would also include my fellow brothers and sisters who work on staff with me here at St. John. I think it also includes our elders, our MMC, our Mission and Ministry Council folks who chart the direction of this church and are in charge of what we're all about. We have a job to do, to open that gate so that the sheep can meet Jesus. But I think it's even bigger than that. Because, in the Old Testament times, in the times of the Pharisees and these religious leaders that Jesus was criticizing, in Israel in those days, everyone was a believer. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone in Israel in the time of Jesus who said, I don't believe in God. Or, my faith is not important to me. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who was an atheist or even an agnostic. I mean, okay, maybe the Gentiles, maybe the Romans that sometimes mixed in with the people, but in terms of Jewish people who lived in Israel at the time of Jesus, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who didn't say, well, yeah, of course I believe in God. I believe in the God of the prophets and of Moses. And I mean, you wouldn't find a non-believer. But today, the situation is a little different, isn't it? Today, the overwhelming majority of people in our world are not believers. The overwhelming majority of people here in the U.S. are not believers. There's a lot of people who say they're believers, but, if you really start talking to them, you realize, no, they're not. And so, who now are the gatekeepers today in 2024 in America? Who are the gatekeepers? Well, all the believers. It's us, gang. Not just me, it's all of us. We're the gatekeepers. We're the ones who can either swing wide the gate so that the world, the people, the sheep can meet Jesus. Or we're the ones who can shut the gate and keep Jesus and the sheep apart. So here's what I mean. It's very simple. It's not rocket surgery. Rocket surgery? It's not brain surgery. It's not rocket science. Neither is it rocket surgery. Let's say there's somebody who feels in their heart that they want to seek Jesus. Maybe there's somebody who's going through a tough time in their lives, and they need something. They're not quite sure what it is, but they think they might find it in a church. They might think they might find it in Jesus. Maybe they got questions, and they're seeking answers. Maybe maybe they just don't even really know why they're here, but they show up. Maybe they just haven't been in church in decades, but they feel like they need it in their life. And they walk in here on a Sunday morning, and someone with a red tag hanging around their neck literally opens the door and gives them a big smile and says, I'm happy to see you. You're here. You belong here. And then they sit down in the pew and somebody says, hey, I'm Mark. I don't think I know your name, right? Or I've forgotten your, whatever. And hey, this is your first time here? Boy, I'm so glad you're here. Oh, you're new, this is your fifth time here? Hey, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you keep coming back. Or it doesn't just have to be greeters, right? It's all of us. When any one of us are on the lookout for new people and are not afraid to say to someone, hey, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Oh, you've been here for 25 years? Okay, great. But, that's awesome. Hey, we should get to know each other. But, I'm always on the lookout for someone who's new. Or anyone who serves on the Altar Guild, the AV Tech team, elders, a choir, musicians, anyone who serves here, say any one of our LWML groups. I mean, the list goes on and on. Anyone who serves here, anyone who creates this environment here at St. John, which welcomes people into the sheep pen, that throws open the gate for people. Then we're doing what Jesus is asking us to do here. We're the religious leaders. We're the ones who are opening the sheep pen. The message is clear. We have a responsibility as Christians. We are the religious leaders of this world, right? Or we can't say, oh, Pastor Mark, it's his job, right? He's the religious leader. I'm off the hook. No, as a believer in Jesus, every single one of us are salt and light. We are the people that God has put into this world to make sure that everyone else finds out about him. We are all the gatekeepers, entrusted with opening the gate and giving access to the Good Shepherd, repeating his voice so that they can follow. But what a joy. Let me ask you this. Is there a greater honor than to be used by God to welcome people into his sheep pen? What better thing could you do in your life than to make people feel like they belong in his house? I think of all the things that I do with my life, all the things that I carry on, even in my job as a pastor, that will mean very little or nothing in eternity. But the people I have welcomed into God's house and made them feel like they belong as God's people, that lasts forever, folks. That lasts forever. For our good, their good, and his glory.